Now what does it sound like? There's an easy way to do things and a hard way in mixing, and a lot of times I find people stumble down the path of the hard way just because they were never shown the easier way. So I hope to help somebody today with maybe something they haven't seen before. And if you've seen all these things, that's awesome. Maybe there's other things you've seen too that you could tell people to save them some time. The first thing, right? Audio Suite is going to be the name of the game today because that's where I find a lot of the time saving tools happen. So, first thing we're going to do is go to the other and then gain. Now, this is helpful to take out breaths. So, every vocal you wind up working on will have breaths that you're going to have to deal with, especially if you use compression. As soon as you compress, the breaths come up. So what I like to do is I come over here, and you could just drag this thing down if you want. But a lot of times, a good number is somewhere around like 12 dB to lower the breaths. Now, either 11.4, 12 dB, 18 dB, somewhere in that zone is going to be good. And you're going to have to listen to what you're dealing with, the source track. Because if it was compressed on the way in and the breaths are specifically like biting your head off, and then you processed a little bit in the box also, or however you're mixing, you may be like, okay, we need more reduction than others, than this other track that has the breaths are much quieter. So every vocalist too, some people, it sounds like, that they're blowing up a pool float backwards. It sounds a little crazy sometimes. So what you might have to do is figure this out. I would say based on the average. So listen to a couple of the breaths, pick a number, and then whatever the number is, you're probably going to stick with it the whole time. So what I would do is first group your tracks. Like, let's say this is vocal 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, in the case of like Brower Eyes, if you saw yesterday's video, he'll process his lead vocal with multiple compressors on different tracks so that he can basically get more out of the vocal. One compressor may push chest, one may push the gut, one may push the head voice. So by using different compressors on different tracks, he can kind of decide the blend he wants of how the vocal's going to punch through the mix, because he can push more chest if he wants by leaning into one compressor, that sort of thing. So he's got multiple compressors on different tracks. And what I did, my little tip to add to it is I like putting an MV2 at the bottom of it, because I find the compressor may be sounding better when you don't hit it too hard. And then if you just touch it with MV2, it winds up doing, bringing up the low level information a little bit, will make it so you don't need to hit the compressor maybe as hard to get it to do the thing that compressor is good at in terms of what part of the vocal it brings out. So first thing we do, we group the vocals, right? This is the first one all the way through to this one. Now, we'll just call it, vocal spelled wrong, voc G. Okay, so that's our vocal group. Now, let's just say that there's, look at any spot. Here's a spot that's like your breaths are going to exist in these kind of spots, right? Where there's nothing in it potentially. So you have a spot like this. Now you just highlight it and then hit render. It's lowered it automatically by 12.2 dB. Now I just grab the whole spot, including where the breaks are, and then Apple F, or I say Apple because I'm old school, Command F. Pretty sure there used to be an Apple there. I don't think I'm making that up. And if I am, it's probably like the pirate movie with Sinbad. They probably just, I don't know what's going on, but it used to be there, and everybody knows it. Okay, that's all I'm saying. So you find all your breaths, and you don't do this without listening. You listen to it, because I can't tell you how many times, sometimes, based on how the singer's moving, or, rapper or whoever, sometimes the breaths will be fine. And not only fine, they make it sound more natural. And a lot of times they're not going to be in the way if the guy turned his face a little, or he's not all in the mic, or maybe like he punched in, so the breath wasn't super apparent. Like there's a number of reasons why you have to listen to find where you hear the bad breath, then do it. Don't just go through and take them all out without listening. As you hear it, that's when you do it. Okay, so I let it go, and then I'll just grab a spot, render, And then you could also just grab all the spots, okay? So you grab every spot, render all this while you're listening. As soon as you hear it, you grab it, you render. Then at the end, you just grab them all and then Apple F for the batch fade. And then you don't have to Apple F every time. So that's a good example of a quick way to do it. If you have one breath, you do it maybe just Apple F that one spot. But if you've got tons, you might as well just do them all together. All right, so that's a big tip. Another one, if you want to open up multiple Audio Suite plugins at once, like, for example, if we wanted this and an EQ, so you could Audio Suite and then just hold Shift and then like our EQ one band. Now we've got our EQ and our gain at the same time. I was giving a lesson the other day, and it didn't occur to me to tell them to hold Shift, and they were like, "Why isn't it staying open?" And I don't know why I didn't remember. It's just so natural. I always hold Shift when I open multiple things because it's the same with everything. Like if you want this and this, you hold Shift and you open both. But I think sometimes certain things, go over my head because I've just been doing it for a while. Anytime you need multiple plugins, you hold Shift. It's not always a good thing to have all the plugins open at one time, but, that could wind up hurting you too. So anyway, let's go to another critical thing that people do in Audio Suite, the Tom Lord Alge Tom trick. Now, if you're familiar with this, you'll understand already what I'm talking about, but you have a drummer that is going to play a tom fill. All right, so you got your rock song, you got, crash. Let's say there was a crash there. I know in that song there is no crash, but let's say there was. The last tom, do and the crash, the tom's still ringing, but that crash is on top of it, let's say. If it was, what would happen is now when you try to make that tom sound amazing, what a lot of people do is they're going to want that tom to be super loud, but then the cymbal crash comes in too loud, so they cut the crash off. That's not what you want to do. What you want to do is put a filter on like an EQ one band in Audio Suite like this, and then you could roll this all the way down to below where a crash fundamental is. Now, the thing with a crash is it could start to bug you around 500 hertz. So when I think where to do this, there's no like right way, but if you take off more than 500, it could be totally fine. And you may have to take it up to like 750, depending on maybe the crash doesn't go down to 500, but sometimes they do. So what I find is pick a number that's low enough that it's below that potential 500 hertz problem where it could be there still. And then you just find that area where the cymbal crash is, and then let's say for argument's sake, it's right here, okay? So the cymbal crash is this beat right here where this thing is. So what I would do is just grab that crash and you hit render, and all that's going to do is roll off the top, but it keeps the body. So when you have the tom, it'll ring, it'll go, you'll hear the transient because that's already happened, but you won't lose the boom. You won't lose the boom. See, that's the thing. If you're a musician, drums, you realize the tom and the crash is not played at the same time. The tom is before the crash. So you won't lose the transient and the poke of the tom and that goodness in the front. But when it rings, you will still get the ring. If you just take the top end off, now you have the ring, but nothing annoying. Play with it to hear what's going on. On this cymbal crash, it's this way. On the other one, it's this way. When he hits the splash, it's this way. So it's like you might have like 2 or 3 different frequency numbers that you could have on different plugins, like just open 3 with the shift thing, and then you'll have 3 open, and then you'll click the one you want when it's that cymbal. So you just leave them open as you go through, and then render. You see what I'm saying? Very easy peasy. And then again, you could do your batch fades if you want. When it comes to cymbals, a lot of times I will fade each one by hand. A lot of people will use Audio Suite for tuning also, especially if the singer's good. If the singer's good, you don't need to run auto-tune the whole time on the track, and in fact, it could make things a lot worse. If they're sliding in and out of notes, it's better to not have it. But what you want to do potentially is grab the note. If you hear something that you don't like, you could grab it, you come up here, you go to auto-tune, and then you could either tune that one note and render it. You could go to graph mode and track the pitch and then draw it how you want. Like there's no right or wrong way. But the point is you do want to one note at a time kind of thing, and then it's rendered forever, so you don't need to run the plugin. So that's critical. Also, soundscapes. There's no cooler way to add excitement to a song than a soundscape. Now, what I mean is, like, create an atmosphere. How do you do it? You grab a section from something. It could be any instrument, it could be a vocal, it doesn't matter. You grab a section, and a lot of times, we're not going to group for this, but we may want a new track. So Shift Apple N gives us a new audio track. Mono is good. Let's say this part of this word, it doesn't even matter, because that's the cool thing when you're doing soundscapes, is like any part of this could become another sound completely. So like I'll grab this, I'll maybe throw it down here, okay? Then I'll come up to Audio Suite and I'll flip it in reverse, because as soon as you wind up reversing stuff, it's no longer going to sound anything like it did before after you've processed it. So now maybe I'll hit it with some sort of, delay. I love this, or reverb rather. So, anything, like just pick something. Doesn't matter. Huge shed. All right. And then, tweak to your heart's content. Make it as long as you want. It doesn't matter. Right. 2 channels at a time, of course. When it says that, this is I'm glad this happened. Shift Apple N gives me another one of these. Okay, so now let's Shift Apple N. So we're going to create 2 mono tracks for doing this with mono stuff, and then we're going to create a stereo track to do this with stereo stuff. Okay, so let's just take these. Let's put 2 of them, but slightly off from each other, like not exactly deadlocked, because it's reversed anyway, so it doesn't even matter. All right, so take these. I cut it. Now I'm going to paste it here, okay? Now that pasted it in that way that I had it going, right? Now I'm going to render this, and now it's not actually, I wanted it to be super long, so we got to make it wetter. We're going to do that again. So the undo is your friend. There we go. Okay. Now, I just gain it up as much as I want. Now look at all this craziness. Now you may say that's a craziness, right? But it's a soundscape, so you could fade it out, you could fade it in, you could also flip it around again if you want, because if you notice it gets louder here. So maybe you want it to be where it's starting in the other way. So I flip it the other way. So now it'll ramp up. So now all of a sudden we've got this. We just created this sound from what we had, from just whatever it was. And if you hear like the word there, maybe you don't want the word, you want everything but the word. So now you got, and maybe that's not enough. So you want to, give it some delay. Let's add a delay to it. So like this is your soundscapes. This is how you create these textures in a track. It doesn't matter which one we use here. Nothing matters. And what I like to do is just like play with it. You're a kid in a candy store, because the more loose you could be with it, you're always one undo away from starting over. How cool is that? And take it as long as you want, and you fade it out. Look, boom. That within the track, it starts to give you some mood, right? And then you could throw auto pan on it, or you could start drawing the pan stuff around. I mean, there's no one way to do this. There's like 100 million ways to do this, but these are the kind of things that people like Tom Elmhurst are doing to make their stuff. Why does Travis Scott have stuff that sounds crazy? Because there's all sorts of sound effects on it that are put there a lot of times during mixing. You know what I'm saying? So this is how you get these soundscapes. They're all done with Audio Suite. Because could you do it with plugins on the thing and automate each one? Yeah, but it's way harder, and this is the way to do it, where you paint and then that stays on the canvas. Now you got to paint around it. It becomes part of the picture, and that allows you to work based on what you just did, and you're always sort of building towards something rather than always giving yourself an out, a way to tweak, to change. Maybe it should have a little longer delay, maybe more feedback. Like, no, just print it and then move on, especially when you get a sound you like. You keep it moving. So I don't wanna go too crazy with this because we could go a while. Like, I love Audio Suite stuff. I mess with it all the time. I dedicate at least an hour or 2 on every mix to doing that, some sort of version of this because as far as I'm concerned, getting the broad scopes of the mix sounding good, 1 to 2 hours, let's say, right? Depending on the song, depending on how much I'm not counting prep work. 1 to 2 hours, you get the thing sounding pretty good where you've printed a version and maybe even been like, "Okay, now I should tweak something, this area or whatever." It could because we're not really talking about the picayune details so much, broad scopes. So 1 to 2 on that, 1 to 2 on sound effects, 1 to 2 to finish off. All right, now, could you do the whole thing in less hours? Probably, but I found that that amount of hours gets me done in approximately a day a song, and then I don't have to worry so much about, you know, what shape is it in tomorrow. It sometimes I'll listen tomorrow, make some tweaks, and then I call it done. But sometimes I don't because I'm just feeling so confident about it. It depends on the song and the day and the everything else. But, you know, getting a song in a position to sound good within an hour or 2 is critical. And then this takes a little bit of time to, like, really add the colors you want, and there might not be room for it. Depends on the song, like we said. But anyway, so much to it. Leave questions, comments, answers, any other ways you guys like to do stuff, use chorus plugins in this kinda way or there's so many different options that I like to do, distortion, chorus, and don't be afraid to cut it up. Make stuff super long and then cut it up, all right? You guys got this. Evan Jaffe Custom Cut Studios. Leave a comment, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. You guys got this. Take it easy.